All right. It is 2 o'clock, so we can go ahead and get started. Welcome to everyone who is joining us. We're really glad that you all are here. Um, Today, we have our Third Coast Water Seminar. This is our third seminar of the series this year, of the revamped series. Current originally had a Third Coast Water Seminar series back during COVID, and it just kicked off a couple months ago. Today, we will be hearing from Dr. Reshmina William, who is on the call, who will be talking about innovation in the water sector, specifically around de-risking innovative technologies through piloting and trials. So before I pass it off to our lovely speaker, I just wanted to give everyone a little bit of a background about Current, who is the host organization behind the Third Coast Water Seminar Series, as well as our initiative Great Lakes Renew. Um, yeah, so just high level, Current in Great Lakes Renew is really focused on this concept of transforming waste into wealth. And that is kind of the backdrop of the Third Coast Water Seminar Series, is elevating innovators and experts in the field, both in the Great Lakes region and beyond, around this concept of transforming waste into wealth. So Current as an organization was founded in 2016, so approaching our 10-year anniversary next year. And it was founded around three core principles. The first being to grow a circular blue economy. The second being to accelerate water innovation. And the third to solve pressing water challenges. So these are focused on specifically in the Chicago area at first, then expanding to Illinois, and now focused on the Great Lakes region. In the Great Lakes region, Current is the anchor organization behind the NSF-backed innovation engine called Great Lakes Renew. Renew standing for the recovery of energy, nutrients, critical elements, and water. So this is done through the selective separation and recovery of these compounds, as well as the selective separation and destruction of contaminants. Great Lakes Renew has a few key objectives. So first, Renew is focused on spurring the circular economy transition, so focusing really on different aspects from workforce development to innovative technology commercialization to innovative research and development, as well as building a collaborative ecosystem around this circular economy transition. We're supporting both R&D projects as well as startups and innovators on the invention and commercialization of selective separation technologies. We're also focused on attracting and retaining water-intensive industries in the Great Lakes. Water is one of our most critical assets, and we're hoping to attract businesses that appreciate water like that as well. On the research and development side, since this is the Third Coast Water Seminars series, which is focused really on those innovations in that space, Great Lakes Renew is funding several projects across four primary challenge areas, which is materials platforms, sensor platforms, process technologies, as well as subsystem test beds. These are across our areas of the recovery of energy, nutrients, water, critical minerals, as well as the separation and destruction of contaminants. Here we have listed some of our projects that we are currently funding. So we're looking at projects varying from the development of PFAS detection sensors to the development of membranes that can selectively separate lithium from seawater. If you all are interested in what was just mentioned, we would love for you all to follow us on socials. You can scan that QR code, which will lead you to our website. We're also active on LinkedIn as well as the other social media sites listed there. And without further ado, I want to pass it off to Dr. Ashlyn Stillwell, who will be introducing today's speaker. Ashlyn?
Great, thank you. And thanks everyone for being here. My name is Ashlyn Stillwell, and I've been involved in Great Lakes Renew and with Currents activities for a number of years now, and I'm really excited to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Reshmina William is joining us. She is a senior project manager at Isle Utilities, and she is working in that role in technology consulting as a professional that has worked with lots of different clients, similar to the work that Current has done, including academia and nonprofits, utilities, technology vendors, and the federal government. She's got a very broad background. She completed her bachelor's, master's, and PhD at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Go Illini. And after she left the University of Illinois, she went through various roles before making her way to Isle Utilities, among those including serving as a AAAS Science, Technology, and Policy Fellow with the Department of Energy, where she was providing a lot of technology and program management expertise on decarbonizing wastewater, water reuse, and desalination efforts. And she's also served on an interagency task force led out of the White House aimed at climate resilience of federal infrastructure projects. So that's the perspective that she brings to us today. And with that, I will hand it over to Reshmina to share with us about water sector innovation, de-risking, piloting, and trials. Welcome.
Hang on a second. There we go. I am unmuted now. Technology is important. Can y'all see my screen?
We do see your
Yeah.
screen. There's a border around it, but we see your screen.
Oh, okay. We'll leave the border. The border is fine. Thank you, Ashley, for that kind introduction. As I was mentioned, the role that I'm bringing here is more aligned with the accelerating water innovation pillar of Current's mission and vision. And I'm bringing more of a technology innovation and commercialization lens than some of the other speakers in this series. Uh, from my role as a senior project management with Isle Utilities, and more importantly, as a trial manager and reservoir lead for the U.S. Utilities Trial Reservoir Initiative within Isle's nonprofit TechAscent Foundation. So, through my work with Isle and my previous work with the Department of Energy, I've seen firsthand the value of an effective trial in helping to accelerate innovation. However, I've also seen the many, many ways that trials can get stuck. So today I'm going to be walking through the life cycle of a proof of concept trial, highlighting some common pitfalls and bottlenecks, and showcasing a new model for trials and pilots that can dramatically accelerate the transition from trial to full implementation. But before I dive into any of that, I'd like to take a step back and first clear up what we mean by a trial in this context. So, a proof of value trial is really about showing the feasibility of a technology in the real world. So, we're not talking about prototype scale, validation, and demonstration, but rather feasibility within an actual real world operational environment. The type of situation where an end user can see the immediate benefits of deployment in their own asset base. And these types of trials are typically most beneficial for mature technologies that are looking to expand into a new market or to expand their commercial footprint. Now, in general, these types of trials are seen as a good thing in the industry because they can allow emerging best practice technologies to overcome some common adoption hurdles. Technology demonstrations improve credibility by providing concrete evidence that a technology will work as intended. They also improve end user engagement and buy in. They might even be a requirement for the procurement process of certain industrial or municipal end users. And finally, trials allow for feedback and design iteration to meet evolving stakeholder needs while reducing costs for future implementations. Despite all of their benefits, proof of concept trials still suffer from persistent bottlenecks throughout their life cycle that can stymie growth and choke point promising technologies before they ever reach the market. So early on in the trials process, we can see hurdles around inaccurate or incomplete assumptions being made about site characterizations that could easily derail a trial. We've also seen that success criteria need to really be clearly understood and defined by both the end user and the vendor as part of the trial design process. Ambiguity kills trials. Even once a trial is launched, shifting organizational priorities due to corporate restructuring, acquisitions, or even simply personnel changes can dramatically alter stakeholder needs and values, affecting trial continuity. And when trials seek to scale beyond benchtop testing, supporting value chains might not be able to scale up to meet trial or commercial demands. Finally, even when a trial is successful, a pilot might not have a clear path forward once the trial is complete. And that lack of certainty can trap technology developers in a spiral of pilots without ever making a sale. Now, these 5 critical bottlenecks are systemic. We've seen them across the industry and in multiple trials. However, they're not often documented, which is understandable given that much less publicly accessible information exists about trial failures than about trial successes. But understanding these common failure points and, more importantly, understanding how to overcome them is really the difference between breakthrough adoption and costly failure. So let's break these down a little bit further, what they mean for entrepreneurs and for end users, and how you all can take measures to overcome them. So let's start with the first hurdle. If a technology requires a certain key site attribute to function, it is critically important that the actual characterization of that attribute be fully obtained on site. So what do I mean by that? This could be things like actual versus forecasted flow rates, or the verification of on-site meteorological conditions. Without that key information, an otherwise capable technology might fail before a trial has even begun. In an absolutely heartbreaking real-world example, a smart water meter's self-powered billing device was designed for water kiosks based on reported flow rates of 18 to 20 liters per minute. During the trial, the actual flow rates measured were only 2 to 4 liters per minute, which meant that the flow rate was insufficient to power the device. Fortunately, there are a few things that technology developers can do to protect against this particular risk. The first, and probably the most important, is to conduct independent site assessments before agreeing to trial parameters. It's also very important to implement multi-stage validation, or in other words, trial stage gating, with different preliminary testing phases that you could test out different site conditions over time. You can build buffer capacity into technology specifications to account for variability. And finally, when it comes to trial contracting, it is vital to establish clear protocols for site condition verification during trial setup. Closely aligned with this first hurdle is the challenge of developing clear, consistent KPIs that are aligned with stakeholder expectations. Vague or open-ended KPIs leave developers and end users open to scope creep, to increased costs, and to selective interpretation. In a real-world example from one of our own pilots, a water quality monitoring trial initially specified hourly sampling with periodic intensive monitoring periods. But when utility personnel changed, the new representative from the utility reinterpreted the KPI to require 15-minute sampling throughout the entire trial. Understandably, this reinterpretation ultimately translated to a 4-fold increase in operating costs that pushed the technology above cost effectiveness thresholds. So it's critically important that success criteria are clearly tied to end user goals and that they are objective enough that at the end of the trial, evaluation becomes a simple yes-no exercise to see whether a technology has met its expected outcomes. In other words, everyone should be crystal clear walking into the trial what they can expect to get out of it. So, what does that look like in practice? Well, firstly, it boils down to really defining quantitative, measurable KPIs that are linked to explicit parameters that measured over the course of the trial. You want to, where possible, include operational cost constraints as binding success criteria because those are very often tied to end user goals and objectives. But you also want to build in flexibility to allow for change control processes for any KPI modifications. And finally, from a trial documentation perspective, it unfortunately has been kind of important to implement early termination cost recovery clauses to discourage bad faith withdrawals. Now, we've heard repeatedly from the trials that we've worked with that the non-technical challenges associated with trial development and implementation can be even more difficult to overcome than technological hurdles. And this is particularly true in the case of corporate restructuring, where changes to the stakeholder team can lead to a shift in priorities and expectations partway through a trial. At best, misaligned priorities can significantly delay implementation as KPIs and scopes are renegotiated. At worst, they can sink a trial altogether. In one potential trial, a telemetry technology successfully completed initial trials with a major water utility. They met all of their original performance targets, but during the enhancement period, the utility underwent two major ownership changes, and each transition brought new priorities, new technical requirements, and ultimately complete disengagement from the original agreement. And this occurred despite the utility having already installed the connection points for the upgraded technology. Fortunately, there are some concrete steps that you can take to future-proof a trial against restructuring. The first and most important is to establish executive sponsorship at multiple organizational levels, making sure that you have executive cheerleaders at multiple hierarchies in the organization to ensure that you've kind of future-proofed yourself against people moving around. You also want to create succession planning for those key trial stakeholders, and that includes documenting institutional knowledge so that you can survive personnel changes. Where possible, if you can design a shorter trial cycle, it really minimizes your exposure to organizational disruption. And finally, again, from a contracting and documentation standpoint, including a continuity clause allows you to survive ownership changes as well. No technology exists in a bubble. So understanding the necessary site integrations and upstream supplies for a technology to function is critical to the success of a trial. Imagine getting to a trial site and realizing that it's impossible to source the enzyme that you need for your water treatment technology. This actually happened in one of our trials. There was an enzymatic water treatment technology that showed excellent proof of concept results, but struggled with enzyme supply reliability. 3 different suppliers were engaged, but none of them could deliver the required combination of volume, activity level, and stability. And the upstream supply chain failure doomed an otherwise promising technology. Fortunately, there are some proactive steps that you can take as you scale technologies beyond the bench to get ahead of some of these supply chain issues. The first is simply risk assessment, understanding the risks embedded in your supply chain before you commit to a trial. It's also probably a good idea to develop multiple qualified suppliers early in the process, which includes building strategic partnerships with suppliers that are really invested in the success of your technology. Where possible, you want to test those scalability assumptions at smaller scales before full-scale deployment. And finally, again, going back to trial documentation, it is important to build in supply chain contingency plans as part of your trial protocols. The final and often most significant hurdle to success lies at the end of a trial. And it's simply that for many trials, no clear pathway exists for next steps after a successful trial. Vendors need to pilot their technologies to prove their value and scalability in the field. In other words, to build a track record of success. But utilities and other end users often don't have the funds to trial every technology that comes through the door. And even if a trial commences and is successful, there's usually no guarantee of long-term procurement of the technology, which means that vendors can become stuck in the piloting valley of death, conducting trial after trial at multiple utilities without making a sale. Now, the Trial Reservoirs Initiative is intended to break this cycle, de-risking and accelerating the uptake of proven but not widely used technologies across the water industry. It's a series of repayable grants that can be used to support technology trials that de-risk the process of demonstrating new best practices. And there are really two factors that make it pretty unique in the sector. The first is that as part of the upfront trial documentation, end users make a meaningful commitment that will allow the vendor to recoup their costs if a trial is successful. The flip side of that is if a trial is not successful, trial reservoirs will eat the cost of that trial. Vendors aren't required to repay their grants, and end users aren't required to uphold their commitment. And together, these two terms help to decouple the piloting process from financial risk for both vendors and for end users. So, how does this work in practice? The trial reservoir model is an iterative process that can broadly be broken down into three phases. The first is identification, which is all about matching the right vendor with the right context. The next is design, which ensures that all stakeholders are aligned around the same set of measurable KPIs. And finally, delivery, or the actual trial itself, and the monitoring and post-trial evaluation that goes on with it. During the early scoping phase, in other words, identification, trial reservoir brings together relevant stakeholders from both the end user and the technology vendor to shape the trial's objectives and determine how much funding the vendor would like to borrow from the pool. In parallel, our trial managers conduct rigorous due diligence to ensure that the opportunity aligns with the program's criteria. In other words, is this a technology that's mature enough to be readily implemented if the trial is successful? In the next phase, the trial reservoir offers hands-on technical and project management support to define a trial's scope, duration, and budget in close consultation with both the end user and the technology vendor. A core focus at this stage is the development of those clear, objective, and measurable key performance indicators, or KPIs, which are aligned with the end user strategic goals. Those KPIs form the foundation for informed decision-making and post-trial evaluation. This phase also includes support in drafting a forward-looking trial and purchase agreement, or TNPA, and this key deliverable describes the conditions for long-term adoption tied directly to trial performance against the agreed-upon KPIs. Now, the utilities commitments as described in the TNPA can take on a variety of different forms, ranging all the way from procurement to limited-scale deployment, but it serves as a meaningful declaration of intent that will allow the technology vendor to recoup the costs of the trial. And finally, once the trial is approved, funds are dispersed to the vendor and the trial commences. A designated trial manager, like myself, would be assigned to the project to monitor progress and ensure seamless communication between the vendor and the end user throughout the project. And at the trial's conclusion, performance is assessed against the previously defined success criteria. If the technology meets expectations, the end user fulfills the commitment outlined in the TNPA, and the vendor uses those funds to begin paying back the grant to the reservoir, thus replenishing the fund for future trials. If the trial doesn't meet its objectives, there's no repayment obligation on the vendor and no long-term commitment requirement for the end user, de-risking innovation for all parties involved. So what does a successful trial reservoir initiative pilot look like in practice? I've got a couple of examples here, one from a utility, one from one of our industrial stakeholders, and one from the developing world, just to give you a taste of some of the breadth of the trials that I've seen come through this program. The first trial that I'll be talking about is between Brabant Water in the Netherlands and Kenwave. Now, Brabant Water's trial actually arose from a technology scan that IL's consulting arm conducted for them around alternative pipe condition assessment technologies. So Brabant Water has hundreds of kilometers of aging asbestos cement transmission mains, And they were particularly concerned about leaks and deterioration that might cause leaching of asbestos into their drinking water. But because of the size of their service network, they were also very concerned about maintaining pipe service and flow through the pipes during assessment, something that isn't really always possible with traditional pipe assessment technologies like ultrasonic testing. Kenwave's vibroacoustic DRI technology allows for external inspection of the pipes, meaning that residual pipe wall stiffness is measured and you can interpret that data to infer structural thickness. And because this is a non-invasive approach, it means minimal disruption for utilities that use their technologies. Now, the Kenwave trial took place over a shortened 2-kilometer section of pipe that had already been baseline tested using ultrasonic technology. In other words, the purpose of this trial was basically to compare Kenwave's assessment against an existing data set. And Kenwave was able to confirm that their technology is both reliable and accurate, saving time and money for Brahmanwater by reducing the number of access points and the amount of disruption during their testing process. As a result, Brahmanwater has agreed to an expanded implementation of the technology on a 12-kilometer section of pipe. The Trial Reservoir Initiative helps to support industrial trials as well. Meadow Lake Mechanical Pulp is one of Canada's only zero wastewater pulp facilities. They recycle the wastewater produced from the production of over 400,000 tons of pulp every year completely on site. However, recycling that volume of high organic wastewater produces a suite of problems: foul odors, a very strange green tint to the water, and chemical oxygen demand levels that frequently topped 1,500 parts per million, leading to all sorts of unwanted algal growth. Enviorganic partnered with the trial reservoir to test an innovative system that utilizes custom-tailored safe microflora to biologically treat a range of organic contaminants. And the results from their 6-month trial with MLMP were really impressive. They managed to reduce COD levels by 30% over the course of the 6-month trial, with a further 50% reduction achieved in the final 6 weeks. They were able to achieve significant reductions in MLMP's odor and color issues, and most importantly for the plant, they achieved significant reduction in operational costs associated with managing both system nutrients and the system's microbiome. And so MLMP has signed a 3-year procurement agreement for the continuous use of Enviorganic system in their facility. Our final example shows the breadth of this program and how the Trial Reservoir Initiative can be used to support technology innovation in the developing world. Wellingaraba and Andaman are rapidly growing villages in Gambia that lack access to clean water. And in this region, in communities without existing water infrastructure, the job of collecting water for the household primarily falls on women and children. So access to clean water is a matter of gender equity and not just public health. E-water is a system that uses solar power to pump and treat borehole well water, which is then distributed by gravity to a series of public smart taps. Customers pay for water using smart tags that can be used to activate a tap for 24/7 access to safe potable water. Now, this isn't a new technology necessarily, but e-water's cheap and effective implementation opened up access to clean, accessible drinking water and created local job opportunities through their maintenance training programs and designated smart tap vendors, as well as cutting 52 tons of carbon dioxide every year linked to water collection and purification. The trial reservoirs model is scalable, flexible, and simple. It's a highly adaptive framework whose success really speaks for itself. 16 pilots launched worldwide with an over 70% success rate, 3 times the industry average. Over its 4-year history, the trial reservoir has reached over 400 technology vendors and leveraged £2 million in external funding. Our 3 current reservoirs tackle challenges including climate change mitigation, industrial reuse in the circular economy, and technology acceleration for minority-led utilities and disadvantaged communities here in the United States. And outside of these three core programs, the model is being emulated beyond the water sector in fields as diverse as healthcare and the arts. I'd like to leave you with a couple of key takeaways that you can take back with you as you lead this session. And the first is that proof of concept trials are a necessary and important part of the innovation process. Trials help to build a track record of credibility for new technologies and give end users a chance for feedback, fostering a culture of transparency and trust. However, there are systemic technical and non-technical bottlenecks that can stymie success at every stage of a trial's lifetime. From site characterization to supply chain scalability, common bottlenecks are systemic. And frequently, non-technical challenges like evolving stakeholder viewpoints are more difficult to overcome than non-technical ones. However, proactive management before, during, and after the trial design process is key to addressing these bottlenecks. Proactive management can include acknowledgement and addressing of risks as part of contract and trial documentation design. It can also include stage gating, risk management, and other project management approaches that can be built into the trial design itself. And finally, the Trial Reservoirs Initiative is a financial model that acts as a pathway to de-risk technology adoption and facilitate successful implementations. ISLE acts as a neutral third party, basically a bridge between the end user and the vendor, while also providing technical and trial management expertise and guidance. And the external validation provided by a reservoir trial can help vendors to establish a track record of excellence that can act as a reference for potential future clients. With that, thank you for your time. Thank you for taking an hour of your day to listen to me yammer on about innovation and piloting. I hope you find this interesting, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Reshmina. It was really great to hear your talk. We do have a couple questions already queued up. And as folks are thinking of them or digesting that, we'd love to hear more as well in the Q&A box. So first, wanted to ask, so you touched on a couple of examples from the Trial Reservoir Initiative, very different applications. Could you talk a little bit about how the Trial Reservoir Initiative differs between, say, like a rural community like in Gambia versus an industrial application?
Can I ask a clarifying question there? What do you mean by differentiate?
I guess are there so you mentioned it's like scalable, it's flexible. Is the I
Mhm.
guess methodology or the approach different depending on the end user?
That's a really great question, Tyler. This model is designed to be able, basically, I don't want to say one size fits all because that makes it sound like a cookie cutter, which it absolutely isn't, but it's designed to adapt to end user needs. You notice that the very first stage of that diagram, I wish that I could have adjusted the size of the segments to show how much time is typically spent in each section.
Mm.
That identification piece and the trial design piece takes up almost all of my time as a trial manager, because it's really, really essential that we get to the heart of why an end user wants to conduct a specific trial. Why is this technology relevant for this end user? And that's, I mean, it's obviously important for any end user. No one wants to waste their time and money on a technology that won't really meet needs, but it's incredibly important when you're talking about vulnerable communities like the two that I presented from Gambia. And we were very fortunate that we had a really good NGO on the ground to act as that liaison and help get us that information. So we knew that those smart taps were the right solution. They weren't going to cause additional equity issues. They weren't going to cause an economic instability condition. Um, but it is critical to engage stakeholders early in the process. I will also say that working with communities here in the United States, especially, we've seen that it's really difficult to scale technologies from the technology perspective, right? So the whole point of Trial Reservoir is to allow vendors to get a second sale, right? And that's usually through
Mm.
word of mouth, and it's usually through a utility telling another utility, "Hey, we had a really great experience working with this particular nitrate reduction technology, go use them. It's harder to do that when you get below a certain size of technology where the population's more dispersed and where people don't talk to each other as much. And that's why it's critical that we work with folks like Current and like the Cleveland Water Alliance, and the Water Council to help build those partnership networks so that people can still learn from each other even when they're below those population thresholds where it's a little more difficult to share technologies. But that's a good question.
Gotcha. Great, thank you. Um, and then someone asked if you could please provide more details about the three core areas that the trial reservoir is focused on.
Sure, absolutely. So our original reservoir, the one that started 4 years ago and is the one that honestly most of our trials fall into, is our climate change mitigation reservoir. So this is for technologies that help to reduce scope one, two, or three emissions in the water sector. Obviously, scope one, two, and three emissions is very broad. It includes everything from like upscale emissions to do with like the number of trucks that you're driving back and forth to load chemicals into your facility to like waste processing and the methane that comes off of your digesters, right? It's everything in the process. It includes leak detection technologies because there's embedded energy in the water that you're using to embedded in the treatment of the water that you're losing through those leaks, right? So it encompasses a wide range of technologies, but that's our largest pool, and the one that we've had the most success in. The second one, which we are very fortunate to have Xylem Innovation Labs as a co-sponsor of, is our advanced and industrial technologies pool. And this is specifically for technologies that drive circular economy, that help to reuse materials that would otherwise not be getting reused, and help to do that within an industrial context typically. So, for example, the pulp and paper industry trial I showed is a great example of that, but we've had other examples where we've had digital water technologies that have helped to improve efficiencies in large companies. We've had methane reduction technologies for large food and beverage industry companies. Um, so that's another wide pool. And then our newest one, which is the one I'm most excited about, is our US utilities reservoir. And this is really designed to level the playing field for minority-led utilities. So utilities that have people of color and minorities in leadership who often are driven out of the innovation game because the field isn't level. And they've got a lot of, let's just say, social stigma behind them. It's also designed for smaller and disadvantaged communities. So your question about rural and smaller utilities falls in here too, because their needs are very different from what we were seeing from a lot of the other utilities we were working through with the other two reservoirs.
Great. Thank you so much. Um, okay, and then we have another question. Could you maybe synthesize, so you mentioned like the, ethos behind the reservoir is the fact that, trialing and getting these technologies from out of that pilot cycle is like so
Mm-hmm.
difficult. Could you, describe a little bit, from your experience, like what are some of the difficulties, in getting technologies to engage with the trial reservoir that initiative that you have? Like, is there, you have over 400 companies that you're talking to,
Mm-hmm.
and then you mentioned like 12 pilots. Are there specific things that stick
Yes.
out or are common that makes that difficult?
So the reason why there's such a discrepancy between the start of our funnel and the end of the funnel is that stage gating process that I mentioned
Mm,
earlier, making sure that they're a good fit for the reservoir and that the end user in this case needs to be on board with the upfront commitment. And really that's often where we hit a sticking point because it's difficult to when utilities have been used to doing trials a certain way and there's no end commitment, it's often difficult to communicate to them the value of putting that commitment. It sounds like you're putting strings attached to the trial, which in some ways we are, but there's a very good reason for it, and it's that we're saving them time and money in the long term, right? Because they don't have to keep going through the same cycle with multiple technologies before they pick one that works. We're basically just saying, hey, you know what you want. This vendor is saying that they can deliver it for you. If they can prove it, just adopt it into your process. And I will say it's often not the utility's fault. Like they want to do this, but there are legal requirements attached to that that sometimes make it difficult. We're figuring out the best way to work through that. So part of it is selecting the right technologies to make sure that they're a high enough technology readiness level, making sure they're the right fit for the reservoir, and all that, making sure that they have enough financial capital that they can pay us back. Again, we're a nonprofit,
Mhm.
but we still need to be able to have enough money in the pool to lend out to people. But it's also partly making sure the end user is fully on board and engaged, and that's why there's such a big drop off in the funneling process.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Thank you. Um, great. Oh, Ashlyn has a question. Go for it.
Reshmina, as you were talking, I remembered one part of your introduction that I didn't bring up, but you were very active in Engineers Without Borders when
Mhm.
you were a student here. And so, given what you've done now in terms of technology pilots, especially in developing contexts, what did you learn then that is valuable now? Or conversely, if you could go back in time and speak to undergraduate Reshmina working on these Engineers Without Borders efforts, what would you tell her?
That's a really great question, Ashlyn. I think what I've learned through hard experience is that it's very easy to be innovative when you have money. I'm sorry to be blunt, but that's real. That's the way the innovation pipeline is built, right? You have to be able to spend money to make money. And so I feel like a lot of our nonprofit colleagues are very conservative with the way they approach innovation, and rightly so, because they have a fiduciary responsibility to use those funds appropriately. And quite often, the communities they've worked with have been so burned by new technologies and vendors that put in something and then just disappear and don't come back and maintain it. Again, it's sometimes not the vendor's fault. Sometimes they literally go bankrupt and don't have the money to come in and help. But it leaves those communities in a real pickle, and it makes them less likely to want to engage with new systems that, again, could save them time and money in the long term. They just don't have the capital to invest in those systems. And I feel like this is this weird chicken and the egg problem that I'm still trying to unpick as I move through my career. But I would love to see ways that current or ISLE or the trial reservoir program within ISLE can help act as those bridges rather than gatekeepers to those technologies. So making sure that communities understand what's out there and who can help them implement those technologies.
Awesome.
Makes sense.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Um, great. And then could you provide maybe just like some high level, like biggest lessons that you've learned through this initiative that you all have?
Mhm. So I think one of the biggest lessons learned, and I've done a couple of these webinars now with different alumni from the program, which has been super fun. One thing that keeps coming up over and over again is it's not the technology that causes the stumbling blocks for these trials, it's the people. It's the non-technical parts of the trial that often cause the biggest challenges because stakeholders move, there's corporate restructuring, people don't fully understand the terms of the KPIs that they're signing themselves on to. It's a people problem. And as engineers and scientists, we are very bad at dealing with people. So I think it's incumbent on us as scientists to do a better job of explaining our technologies, but also to leverage, the science communicators in the room, folks like Karnt who can act as bridgers again between the folks who are actually putting this in the ground and the people who are the scientists who have these cool new ideas that they want to trial and scale and have wonderful potential impacts so that they can point out the little hiccups, like the fact that, hey, we don't have a way of supplying you with an enzyme for your enzymatic treatment process. Or, hey, you know that fog harvester that you want to put in? Um, we've noticed that the climate's been getting drier year on year because of climate change, and so you might not be able to get the amount of water out of the system that you think you will. Um, so acting as that bridge piece, I think, is really, really important. So I think that's probably the biggest lesson learned. Learn to talk science better.
As a someone with an engineering and science background, that is definitely, I can agree that that is a personal area of struggle. So I would agree with that lesson just from a personal level as well.
Mhm.
Awesome. And then based on like your experience, I guess what's an area that you're most excited about in terms of like where innovation is happening in the water world? Either a type of
Ooh, ooh.
technology or like in a specific application or whatever.
I love this question, and it's kind of twofold for me. My background is in stormwater management and nature-based solutions, and so I am so excited to see people getting more involved with like nature-based solution piloting and in like engaging with the idea that hey, you could test these systems out of the field, like in technology platforms that have been designed to test fire retention swales. Isn't that a novel thought? So that's really cool. The other thing that makes my dorky little heart sing is the upswelling, not necessarily of AI, but of what we call digital water. So SCADA systems,
Mhm.
AMI systems, people becoming more cognizant about what it means to be a data-driven utility. And the new technologies are kind of climbing onto that bandwagon. So we've had a couple of really interesting things pop up where people want to test out asset management systems. I told you this was a really dorky thing that makes me very happy. But, you know, I think that data is at the heart of what makes a good utility. It really helps you to dial in on what you can be doing better, but it also is a teaching tool. If you have good data, it means you can talk about your utility in a meaningful way to both your employees and to your end users. So, short answer for you, Tyler, the rise of data in water makes me very, very excited to see what is to come.
That's awesome. And then kind of on another spin to that, if you were based on like your experience working with like different utilities and end users, um, where do you think like where does their interest lie? Like what is the biggest thing that they're focused on? I mean, is it also data or is it something else?
Data is certainly one of them, and asset management is tied into that as well.
Right.
I think that people are realizing that you can't do a good job of maintenance without knowing what things are broken in your system. And so that's kind of the asset management piece there. Um, there has also been a real push, which makes me really excited, towards sustainability. So understanding what it means to be um, a part of a sustainable circular economy as like a wastewater reclamation facility or as a drinking water facility. How do you engage with your neighbors and make sure that like your biosolids are going to the right people? Layered on top of all that, obviously PFAS has been in the news for like the last couple of years. And
Mm.
so anything that can help take the PFAS burden off of the utility to allow them to engage in those circular economy concepts, I think is going to be really critical moving into the future because it's hard. It's so hard as a wastewater utility to think about what am I going to do with my biosolids when the answer is legally I'm not allowed to apply it on a farm field, or legally the only thing I can do is send it to a landfill because I'm not allowed to incinerate it because of PFAS. So I think PFAS is probably the next, moving challenge, especially PFAS destruction, not just removing it and making it somebody else's problem.
Right. Great. Thank you so much. Um, Perfect. So unless anyone else has any other questions, it looks like we are about wrapping up. Great. So let me just pop um our final slide up. Um, Awesome. Yes. So thank you, Reshmina. Really great to hear your talk, as well as really great to have everyone's engagement and questions come in, and for your thoughtful responses to those as well. For everyone who's on this call today, just a little bit of a reminder and a heads up. This is a monthly seminar series, so we will be having our next seminar on December 3rd, which is a Wednesday at 2 p.m. It will be virtual again. And we will be hearing from Dr. Jacob Jones from North Carolina State University, who will be speaking about phosphorus sorbents and their role in a circular phosphorus economy. And with that, thanks again, everyone, and we hope you all have a great day. This will also be posted on YouTube later if you want to revisit it again or want to share it with some folks, so keep an eye out for that as well. All right, take care.